This passage of Jesus' temptation, some version of it is in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those Gospels that we spend most of a year in, year by year. And every year we hear one of their versions of Jesus' temptation on the first Sunday of Lent. On this first Sunday when we celebrate the resurrection, as that every Sunday is a feast of the resurrection. In the midst of the season of Lent, the season of preparation to renew our own baptismal vows, the season where we make our way back to the font at the great vigil of Easter. And on our journeys back to Jesus, we hear Jesus as he is discerning his own ministry, the way Luke tells it. One of the other evangelists has the temptations before the baptism. That's not Luke's point here. Here, Jesus has been baptized and has heard that he is the Son of God, God's chosen with whom God is well pleased. And in Luke, only Jesus hears that at the baptism. Following that, Luke gives a genealogy of Jesus, who he came from, all the way back to Adam, who, like Jesus, is named as a son of God. And then we have this passage where Jesus has been fasting, or is fasting, for 40 days. And an evil force comes to tempt Jesus in repetition of Adam's temptations. Fred Craddock says about this evil force, quote, "The scriptures variously characterize the power of evil in the world, tendencies within ourselves, a personal being outside ourselves, perhaps a powerful angel gone astray, a generic cosmic power of evil, and organized forces arrayed against the will of God for the world." In Luke's version, where Jesus has been told he is the Son of God and Adam is named as a son of God, this tempter for Jesus is the slanderer. In Matthew, it's the accuser. In English, for both, we just get the devil most of the time. This slanderer starts each of his temptations by questioning what God has already told Jesus and what Luke has said about Adam. Starts them with, "If you are the Son of God." Not just if you are who you claim to be, because Jesus has not said that yet. Peter has not confessed that Jesus is God's Messiah. The slanderer says, "The voice you heard has lied about who you are. If you truly believe it, do these things." And Jesus is tempted for things that are already within his reach. If you're hungry, make bread using your divine power. If you worship me, you can have all of this, all of the realms, dominions, powers, and principalities of this world. If you throw yourself down, the angels will protect you. All of these things that Jesus is tempted with are summarized very nicely on the cover of the Sunday paper Junior today. I got those updated, Logan. It's not Christmas anymore. Thank you for the reminders. The cover of the Sunday paper Junior says, the devil, something to the effect of, the devil wants Jesus to do things his way and not God's way. The temptations that Jesus faces are all shortcuts, or doing things not that he's not supposed to do, just not when he's supposed to do them. Breaking his fast early, being in control of all of the realms of the world, although that is his ultimate destiny as God's Messiah. Being saved by angels, which is a foreshadowing of the crucifixion, before his time to defeat death, not by avoiding it, but by going through it, happens. The temptations that Jesus faces are all things that are within his reach. The temptations that we face usually are things that are within our reach too. Our reach before the appointed time, taking a shortcut with good intentions. We know what good intentions pave the road to. And their offers were tempted to rise, to do better, not to fall. I've just binged the Netflix series Ozark, which I do and don't recommend. It's fine. But without any spoilers, no one hopes to break bad. No one, when they want to do well for their family, intends to have a Mexican cartel threatening them with guns. That's the fine print, the small print of temptation. No one wants to fall or to have societal and personal and relational collapse. Those things are a byproduct, though, of giving in to temptation, whatever that means. One way that, as I reflect on our temptations collectively right now, through the history of my short life, to do things that are within our power, but not necessarily at the right time, are our rush over the last 25 years, 20 years, to unilateral war, to doing things ourselves, to thinking we are the sole solution providers as the United States, and not acting in discernment with the rest of the international community. Right now, many I know, perhaps many of us, are anxious about what's happening in Ukraine, understandably. And for those of us born after the Cold War, but who can't remember the first Gulf War, or those like Tom, whose earliest memories are of 9/11, there's never been a time when the United States didn't see an international problem and think to solve it with boots on the ground yesterday. That's the temptation we're facing right now, while we're waiting and seeing what actually happens, what the actual desires are, and what God's timing, working through the Spirit, emboldening us and slowing us, leads us to. The temptations Jesus faces are a reversal, even as they're within his reach, of accomplishing things, of temptations that Adam, named as a son of God, has also faced. While the author of the letter to the Hebrews writes explicitly, and we'll hear it in our Eucharistic prayer, that Jesus was tempted in every way as we are, yet did not sin, that's not the point in Luke's passage. That's part of the story of Jesus becoming human. But for Luke, it's not about how we are like Jesus, full stop. For Luke, it's about how Jesus took on the temptations of Adam and, rather than falling like Adam, succeeded. In the Genesis creation stories, we are told that Adam and Eve are created in the image of God, and the understanding there is that they are in the image of God the way that Topher looks just like his parents. More so in baby pictures of one of us or the other. But just like, that is the image of God. The temptation for Adam is to be like God, that which he already is and is growing day by day through relationship. And so Adam reaches out and eats to get something before the appointed time. Jesus, however, does not give in to that temptation. He holds off. And for Luke, while Jesus is tempted every way that we are and yet does not sin, Jesus is holding off on eating, holding off on ruling, holding off on defeating death by its avoidance rather than breaking through it? Is Jesus reversing the curse of our first parents? Jesus conquering sin by giving us, God made human, giving us humanity another chance to get it right, starting with him. And Jesus wins. Jesus short-circuits all our failures and replaces them with God's successes for us. In this journey to Lent, journey through Lent, we don't hear this passage as we're 4 days into Lent to say to ourselves, well, I didn't even make it 4 days. I broke my fast. I'm just not good enough like Jesus. That's not why we hear this passage, beloved. We hear this passage because this passage reminds us that in Lent, we are clearing out everything that gets in the way of us and Jesus. And we hear this passage to know that God's love for us, God's work for us, God's redemption of us has been accomplished. We hear this to reorient ourselves toward Jesus, whose promises we will renew. That's a terrible sentence. At the Easter Vigil, when we renew our baptismal promises. We fall, and the world falls. The slanderer has said to Jesus, "If you are the Son of God." But that's more than us making it through our 40 days. Instead, it's Jesus taking control, God through Christ writing human history and beginning the process of reorientation and restoration of relationships. Jesus gives us power to look to him, not to ourselves, and gives us power to avoid the good intentions and wait for the long game. One way this is bearing out in our community and in our congregation, one way that someone I read this week, perhaps it was Robert Jones in White Too Long, our Lenten Bible study, perhaps it was the commentaries that I consult, is the transition in language from racial reconciliation to racial justice. Or in other aspects of life, moving from not only acts of mercy, but also looking to do justice, to look at ripple effects, to look backward and look forward, to wait and see not just how things play out, but what kind of effects will happen if we act one way, or what kind of effects have happened because our forebears acted a certain way. The rush that so many of us have experienced or have witnessed toward racial reconciliation is wanting to skip to the end, where everything is okay, and we hold hands and we're forgiven for our microaggressions and our macroaggressions. And we don't have to take any blame or do any restitution of any kind, not just for the sins of our forebears or the sins that we have committed ourselves, but for the ongoing benefits we have reaped. The way we reap benefit of salvation through Jesus' work. It's a good intention to seek racial reconciliation, which is probably why we're so tempted to it. It's the shortcut. It's the jump ahead. And the shortcut and the jump ahead are what is within our power. We're not tempted to do things that are impossible. We're tempted to do what's right there without waiting, praying, and discerning. So as we're going through this Lent, we are reorienting ourselves as a congregation, as a community, following the guidance of the Spirit, looking and listening to Jesus, Jesus has given us the power to overcome Satan through him. And watching Jesus, we too can overcome our temptations, not merely to get through our Lenten fasts or abstinences, but to get through the power of sin in our lives, the power that holds us bound, not because we are inherently evil, but because we can read the newspaper and see that despite our best intentions, as a species, we keep messing up. Often because we want to take the shortest and fastest route. We have good intentions to get to the end quickly without looking at what might be or its ongoing effects. So in this Lent, as we clear away those things that distract us from Jesus, we remember that Jesus has overcome Satan and all those temptations, and that looking to Jesus, we can too, with God's help. With God's help in those promises that we will renew at the Easter Vigil. And we're reminded again and again and again of God's desire for salvation for humanity, and God's making it available to all of creation through Jesus' resurrection. We will, with God's help, resist temptation to take shortcuts and wait in God's time for not just good intentions, but for good and just outcomes. Amen.